My wife ignored my breathing emergency and snapped, "Quit faking it, get in the kitchen." Then the paramedics arrived. 11 years. That's how long I was married to Lucy Evans. 11 years of Sunday pasta and Thursday debates and a dining table candle we never remembered to light. And on a Saturday night in November, while I was on my kitchen floor with a failing heart rhythm, 911 on the line, and a wooden spoon on the tile where I'd dropped it, my wife of 11 years looked up from her phone, looked directly at me, and said, "Quit faking it." She went back to scrolling. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know because I watched the microwave clock the entire time. What came after, the hospital room at midnight, the timestamps Priya showed me, the forged signature on a financial document I never signed, that's the part of this story that will stay with you. Viewers, before you continue, please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories. My name is Evans Rio, and I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not a dramatic man. I teach high school history in Portland, Oregon. I coach the junior varsity debate team on Thursday afternoons. I make my own pasta on Sunday mornings, not because I'm trying to be impressive, but because my grandmother taught me how when I was 9, and some habits become the closest thing you have to prayer. I am 38 years old, and until 8 months before the night I ended up on my kitchen floor fighting to breathe, I believed I was living inside a good marriage. Not a fairy tale. Not a movie. A real one, with disagreements about the thermostat and cold coffee and the kind of silences that feel comfortable rather than loaded. 11 years with Lucy Evans. 11 years of building something I thought was solid. I want you to hold that word. Solid. Because the thing about structures that are quietly failing is that they look exactly like structures that are standing. You walk through the same rooms, sleep in the same bed, share the same refrigerator, and nothing announces itself. Nothing waves a flag. The rot works from the inside, and by the time you smell it, the foundation is already gone. It was a Friday in late October when I first felt the specific quality of silence that should have told me everything. I came home from school still buzzing from a good day. My third period class had finally cracked the causes of the First World War, this beautiful moment where you watch 15 teenagers suddenly see how one assassination becomes 4 years of catastrophe. I stopped at the store. I bought clams and linguine and a bottle of the Willamette Valley White Lucy had loved on our anniversary in September. I set the table with the good plates. I lit the one candle we kept on the dining table that neither of us ever remembered to use. She came home 40 minutes late and looked at the table and said, "Oh. I already ate." She said it the way you say, "I already got the mail." Here is something nobody tells you about being erased slowly: you don't notice it happening in real time. You notice it all at once, in retrospect, like stepping back from a painting you've been standing too close to for years and finally seeing what it actually is. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. Every brushstroke suddenly makes a terrible kind of sense. The dismissals had started 8 months before that October Friday. February, I mentioned chest tightness after a long run along the Willamette River Trail. Lucy looked up from her laptop and said, "You're not 20 anymore, Evans." Not cruel. Just efficient. Like my discomfort was a scheduling inconvenience she didn't have bandwidth for. I laughed it off. I told myself that was just how she communicated, practically, without sentiment. I'd told myself that many times before. In April, I had a panic attack in the school parking lot. First one in 6 years. I sat in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel and called her. She answered on the third ring. She listened for 45 seconds, I counted, because some part of me was already keeping score without my permission, and said, "Did you try breathing into a bag?" Then her work call beeped and she was gone. Just like that. Lucy Evans grew up the youngest of 4 children in a Cincinnati household where illness was treated as theater. Her father, a rigid, impatient man who believed suffering was mostly performance, had once made her mother drive herself to the emergency room for a broken wrist because he thought she was exaggerating. Lucy had absorbed that blueprint without ever examining it. In her emotional architecture, vulnerability was manipulation until proven otherwise. When I first learned this about her, early in our relationship, I thought it was something love could gradually undo. I was patient. I gave her space. I made myself smaller so she wouldn't feel crowded by my needs. What I didn't understand then was that I wasn't giving her room to grow. I was teaching her that my needs didn't matter. And she was an excellent student. It was a Wednesday. November 3rd. I remember the date because the debate team had just won a regional qualifier, the first time in 4 years, and I'd driven home with the windows down despite the cold, that specific aliveness you feel when something you've worked hard for finally breaks open. I wanted to walk through my front door and tell Lucy. I wanted to see her face do the thing it used to do when she was genuinely happy for me, this unguarded brightness that had been her most beautiful feature long before I ever noticed how she looked. She was distracted the moment I walked in. Sitting on the couch with her legs folded under her, phone in her lap, a glass of wine on the coffee table that she hadn't offered to share. I told her about the qualifier. She said, "That's great, babe," without looking up. Her phone lit up. She turned it face down in one practiced motion. It lit up again 11 minutes later. Same motion. Smooth. Automatic. The motion of someone who had been doing this long enough that it no longer required thought. I went to refill her wine glass, I don't know why, habit maybe, or hope, and when I reached across the coffee table her phone lit up a third time and I saw the name before I could stop myself. Cole. 9:47 p.m. I set the wine glass down carefully. I walked back to the kitchen. I stood at the sink with the water running and looked at my own reflection in the dark window above the faucet. Cole Whitfield had joined Lucy's architecture firm 14 months earlier, transferred from San Francisco. He was 34, recently divorced, and according to her coworker Priya, who would sit across from me weeks later with guilt written into every line of her face, he had pursued Lucy quietly, methodically, the way someone renovates a house one room at a time so the owners don't notice the layout changing until they no longer recognize where they live. I didn't know any of that yet. I just stood at the sink and let the water run cold over my hands. I went to see my doctor the following Monday. I told myself it wasn't about Lucy, and that was partially true. The chest tightness from February had returned, no longer occasional but insistent, like a hand resting permanently on my sternum without permission. I'd been dismissing it the way I'd learned to dismiss things, quietly, efficiently, with the same practiced minimization Lucy had spent years modeling for me. Dr. Patricia Owens had been my physician for 9 years. She was the kind of doctor who looked at you when you talked, really looked, the way people do when they're actually listening rather than waiting for their turn to speak. She listened to my chest with her stethoscope, took my blood pressure twice without explaining why she was doing it a second time, and then sat down across from me in the particular way that doctors only sit when the next sentence is going to matter. She said my heart was showing signs of arrhythmia. Irregular rhythm, probably stress-triggered, but serious enough to warrant monitoring. She wrote a referral for a cardiologist and slid it across the desk and then paused before I could take it and said, very quietly, "Evans, are you sleeping? How is the stress level at home?" I said everything was fine. She looked at me the way people look at you when they know you're lying but respect you enough not to push. I took the referral and put it in my jacket pocket. What I hadn't told her, what I hadn't told anyone, was that the episodes had been escalating for months. Standing at the whiteboard mid-lesson and feeling the room tilt sideways. Gripping the kitchen counter after climbing the stairs. Once, sitting in my car outside a grocery store on Burnside for 22 minutes because I genuinely wasn't sure I could stand without something going wrong. I hadn't told Lucy because the 2 times I'd tried, she'd redirected the conversation within 90 seconds. Both times to logistics, the mortgage payment, the gutters, the calendar. The machinery of our shared life, which she managed with precision, as though precision was the same thing as presence. I drove home with the referral card in my pocket and made dinner and said nothing. She said she was going to the gym. She'd been saying that every Saturday morning for 6 weeks, up early, workout clothes, gym bag, out the door by 8:15. I had believed it the way you believe things when the alternative is a conversation you're not ready to have. But I'd texted her friend Bree the previous week about something unrelated, and Bree had mentioned offhandedly that she and Lucy hadn't worked out together in almost 2 months. I sat with that cold stone in my stomach and said nothing. That Saturday morning I asked Lucy if we could talk when she got back. I said it plainly. No accusation in it, no drama, just the simple, honest sentence of a man trying to reach his wife across a distance that had stopped feeling temporary. She looked at me and something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt, not quite. Something more controlled than guilt. A rapid internal calculation, like a chess player assessing the board. She said, about what? I said things had felt off between us. That I wanted to check in. That I missed her. I actually said that, standing in our kitchen in the morning light, I told my wife I missed her while she was standing right in front of me. She picked up her gym bag and said, "Evans, you always catastrophize. Everything is fine. Can we please not make the weekend heavy?" Then she left. There was a version of me, the version from years 1 through 6 of this marriage, who would have accepted that completely. Who had accepted versions of it many times. I had a long history of translating Lucy's deflections into my own failures. If she shut a conversation down, I assumed I'd raised it wrong. If she pulled away, I searched myself for the cause. 11 years of that kind of quietly inverted accountability leaves a mark you can't locate in the mirror but feel constantly. But Dr. Owens had said something as I was leaving her office. She'd touched my arm and said, "Please don't minimize your own symptoms to manage someone else's comfort." She'd meant it medically. But standing alone in my kitchen, I finally heard everything else she meant. She came home from the gym at 1:15. She showered and spent the afternoon on her phone, drifting between the couch and the bedroom with the particular restlessness of someone waiting for something I wasn't part of. I moved around her carefully, the way you move around something fragile, though by that point I'm not sure which of us I was trying to protect. Around 7 I started cooking dinner. Not as a gesture, I was past gestures. Just because someone had to eat, and keeping my hands busy was the only way I knew to keep myself from saying the things building pressure behind my sternum. Which, as it turned out, was not the only thing building pressure there. It hit me without warning. Not the slow creep I'd been managing for months, this was categorically different. A sudden interior collapse, like the floor of my chest simply gave way. My vision went gray at the edges. My left arm went strange and heavy. I grabbed the counter with both hands and the wooden spoon hit the tile floor and I said her name. Lucy. She didn't look up from her phone. Lucy. Louder this time. Something's wrong. She looked up. And the expression on her face, I will carry it for the rest of my life. It wasn't alarm. It wasn't the face of a woman looking at her husband and seeing an emergency. It was irritation. Measured, exhausted, deeply familiar irritation, the look she gave the dishwasher when it ran a full cycle without cleaning anything. She said, "Evans, quit faking it. You always do this when you want attention. Get back in the kitchen." She went back to her phone. I slid down the side of the cabinet and sat on my kitchen floor. The pot was still bubbling on the stove above me. The overhead light was too bright. I could hear the television in the other room, muted, flickering. I got my phone out of my pocket with shaking hands. My thumb found the screen. I called 911 from my kitchen floor while my wife sat 8 feet away and scrolled. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know because I watched the microwave clock the entire time, counting the numbers forward, using the counting to stay conscious, to stay present, to give my mind something to grip while my body did whatever it was doing beneath me. 4 minutes and 30 seconds is a very long time when you are on a cold floor wondering if this is the version of the story where you don't get back up. They came through the front door I'd managed to crawl to and unlock during the call. There were two of them, a paramedic named Reyes who moved with the specific calm of someone who has walked into frightening rooms so many times that fear no longer precedes her, and her partner whose name I didn't catch but whose steadiness I will never forget. They worked quickly. Reyes knelt beside me, 2 fingers to my wrist, eyes clear and focused entirely on me. She asked my name. I told her. She looked at her partner and said something in the efficient shorthand of people who do urgent things together every day. I looked up from the floor. Lucy was standing in the kitchen doorway with her hand over her mouth. Not crying. Not moving toward me. Standing with her hand over her mouth and her eyes performing that rapid mathematics again, working out what this scene meant. What it would cost. How the story she'd been living somewhere else would now have to account for this particular room. Her phone was still in her other hand. Priya would tell me later that Lucy had texted Cole during those 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Not to say what was happening. Not to cancel anything. Just continuing a conversation that had apparently been running all afternoon. Priya saw the timestamps when Lucy handed her the phone at the hospital, distracted, not thinking. Priya said nothing then. But she came to see me 3 weeks after I was discharged, and she sat at my kitchen table and told me everything, and I could see the weight of it leaving her as she spoke and understood she'd been waiting since that night to put it down. They kept me overnight. The cardiologist on call confirmed what Dr. Owens had suspected, a significant arrhythmia, stress exacerbated, that had triggered what he called a near-syncopal episode. In plain language, my heart had been sending distress signals for the better part of a year, and the accumulated weight of everything I had been quietly absorbing had finally made those signals impossible to override. He said I was fortunate it hadn't been worse. He said that with a kind of careful neutrality that told me he knew what worse looked like. Lucy came to the hospital. She sat in the chair beside my bed for 2 hours. She brought water. She answered the doctor's questions when he addressed her. She performed the role with a desperate, studied competence, the way someone performs when they know the room is watching and they haven't yet decided what version of themselves to be in the aftermath of an enormous thing. She didn't hold my hand unless I reached for it first. She left at 11 to go home and get some rest. I watched her walk out through the double doors and then I lay in the specific silence of a hospital room at midnight, which is unlike any other silence because it has no performance in it. Hospitals strip that away. You can't be anything in a hospital bed at midnight except exactly what you are. I thought about a drive Lucy and I had taken in year 4 of our marriage, coming back from her parents' house in Cincinnati. She'd been quiet for most of it and then said, out of nowhere, "I think I'm afraid of needing people." I'd asked what she meant. She said, "When someone needs me, I don't feel love. I feel trapped." I had held that confession carefully for 7 years. I had built entire accommodations around it, shrinking my needs, softening my requests, making myself small enough that she'd never feel crowded. I thought that was what love required sometimes. Lying there at midnight, I finally understood she hadn't been sharing a vulnerability. She had been handing me a manual. And I had spent 7 years following it faithfully, to my own ruin. My sister Nora arrived from Sacramento the morning after I was discharged. I had sent her one text from the hospital, 4 words, "I need you here," and she'd booked a flight before I finished typing. That's the thing about people who actually love you, they don't need to calculate whether to show up. She cooked, drove me to my follow-up appointment, and slept on the couch without complaint for 5 days. She also looked at Lucy the entire time with the expression of someone watching a slow fire they've been asked not to name. When Nora left, I asked Lucy to sit down. She already knew. People always know before the conversation begins. The knowing lives in the body, ahead of the words, and I could see it in the way she sat, carefully, like someone lowering themselves onto uncertain ground. I told her I knew about Cole. I didn't raise my voice. I laid it out plainly, the timestamps Priya had shown me, the Saturday mornings that weren't gym sessions, the name on her phone at 9:47 on a Wednesday night. I watched her face as I spoke and saw the thing behind it shift from calculation to something that looked almost like relief. The terrible, exhausted relief of someone who has been carrying a secret until it weighs more than the consequence of setting it down. She said, "I didn't want to hurt you. I just stopped knowing how to be here." I said, "Lucy. You watched me on the floor." She looked at the window. "I called 911 myself. From the kitchen floor. While you were 8 feet away." The room was very quiet. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn, the world running at its normal, indifferent frequency, completely unbothered by the fact that 11 years were ending in a living room in Portland on a gray November afternoon. I told her I needed her to leave for a while. She nodded. No argument, just that same exhausted relief, spreading into acceptance. She packed a bag that evening and went to her friend Dana's apartment across the river. I stood at the window and watched her car pull out of the driveway, and I stayed at the window long after the car was gone, watching the empty street as though it might tell me something the last 11 years hadn't. 3 months later. I'm sitting at my kitchen table on a quiet Tuesday morning in Portland, and the light coming through the window is that particular November gray gold that makes ordinary rooms look like they're being painted in real time. I'm drinking coffee I made for one. The table is clear. The house is mine in a way it hasn't been in years, not because she's gone, but because I finally stopped making myself invisible inside it. The divorce is in process. It isn't vicious. We are two people who built something real and then became people the structure could no longer hold. I think Lucy loved me, in her way, the way her father's house taught her love looked, which was to say, without softness, without pause, without the willingness to stop when someone needed you to stop. I don't say that to excuse the kitchen floor. Nothing excuses the kitchen floor. But I can hold both things now, that she loved me, and that she let me lie there. People are large enough to contain both. That's the part that takes the longest to make peace with. Cole ended things with her 3 weeks after she moved out. When I heard that, I waited to feel something satisfying. I didn't. I just felt tired, and underneath the tired, something quieter and more durable that I think might eventually become peace. My heart rhythm is stabilizing. Nora calls every Sunday without fail. My debate team made it to the state semifinals, and at practice last Thursday, a sophomore named Theo, the most relentlessly honest questioner I have ever had in a classroom, asked me why the labor organizers of the 1930s kept fighting after losing so many times. I thought about it the way you think about a question that is actually about something else. Then I said, because sometimes the fight changes you into the person who can survive the outcome. He wrote it down. I watched him write it down, and thought, yeah. Me too, Theo. What I didn't know yet, what I would learn 2 weeks later when Lucy's firm began an internal compliance review, was that Cole Whitfield's name was at the center of it. And that one of the flagged documents contained a financial disclosure submitted 18 months ago, bearing what the investigators believed was a forged signature. Mine. Some floors, once you've stood back up from them, turn out to be doors. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories.